All right, I guess we'll get started. Thank you all for coming to our very first 2813 career panel. This evening, we'll be hearing about our first three amazing parents. Our fourth one did not show up. While we're going through the main questions, feel free to put any questions in the chat and we'll get to them in the last 15-20 minutes as kind of open discussion. And yeah, so let's get started. Mr. Singh, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Vijay, and I'm Sid's dad. So I'm a software engineer. I did a degree in electronics engineering as my undergrad from India. And as it happens, I'm actually back in school right now. I am doing a graduate degree from Berkeley in data science, information and data science. So basically all this stuff that you hear about AI and machine learning, and I'm excited to be here.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kawamoto, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Mae Kawamoto, Hally's mom. I am a structural engineer, and I'm in the private sector. So do anything from residential remodels through private schools, public schools, commercial buildings, new and renovations. I studied architecture, have a degree in architecture and in Arch-E.
Cool, thank you. And Ms. Kahn.
Hi everyone, I'm Lori Kahn, and I'm Ben's mom, and I am a systems engineer, and specifically in the last 6 months I am now a systems engineering and integration manager at Lockheed Martin, where I've been for 24 years now, and I studied physics astronomy. Got a master's degree in that, but then switched to systems engineering when I got to Lockheed. And I got a certificate later in spacecraft design and operation efficiency. But yeah, I'll tell you more about that career as we move forward.
All right, thank you. So our first question will be, personally, what made you choose your career over others? It could be like you were in between different careers. Maybe you were just interested in that. Ms. Kawamoto, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I guess my initial thought for a career was architecture. In high school, there was a drafting class, not CAD, hand drafting with parallel bars, T-squares. And I was a little interested in going into mechanical design, perhaps. But then the teacher happened to be a former architect, and he got us into competitions for architectural design in high school. So we went to the county fair and such. So piqued my interest. I don't have anyone else in my family that is in architecture, so didn't really have any mentors to speak of, but was very interested in the profession at that time. So I started architecture at Cal Poly, and when I took my first Arch-E class, I was thinking, oh, this may be better for me, only because architecture is a lot like an art where you put your heart and soul into something and you can get ripped apart big time in a design charrette or in a review. If you kind of have to have thick skin and be very confident about your designs, and so I felt like I wasn't that great, but I did like numbers. I was a science math person. I liked the finite answer. Whereas, I mean, even in structural engineering, there's no finite answer either, because it's loads that are sort of estimated and you try to predict the behavior of building. So it's a little bit not finite either, but more so than sort of an art path for me. So I chose to double major in architecture and archi since they're so closely related. And I would have liked to get my architecture license, but I ended up working for a structural engineer and got my structural engineering license instead.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kahn, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so how did I get into engineering? So my growing up, I got really intrigued by space, outer space. And I went to space camp for 3 different times through high school. And so I was really excited about astronomy. When I went to college, that's what I studied, and I thought that I was going to continue on doing astronomy research. And what happened to me was I noticed that the career path for someone doing astronomy was basically to become a professor at a college or university, and then do your research on the side. So there weren't a lot of opportunities to get outright funding to do your research. It was, hey, you got to go, work for a university that has the money that can pay you and let you do that on the side. And I just didn't really see that as suiting me as a person. I taught some classes as a teaching assistant in graduate school and just didn't find that to be all that appealing to me. So there was a professor, I went to ASU for my graduate school, and there was a professor there who had a contact at Lockheed Martin, and it happened to be the right time that they were looking to hire people, and so I ended up, instead of getting a PhD, I ended up getting a master's degree in physics there, and transitioned to. And Lockheed was the one who told me, "Oh, someone with a science degree, systems engineering is the right career for you." And the reason for that is my job as a systems engineer is understanding the big picture, problem solving, being able to understand the technical just enough, not necessarily really, really deeply, and so, but knowing enough to be able to kind of put things together, be organized, and basically help define the requirements and the interfaces. That's been most of my focus through my career at Lockheed Martin. And I'd say it worked out pretty well because I haven't had a desire to change what I've been doing. I did dabble a little bit in subcontract management and project management for a while, but I eventually came back to systems engineering, and now I'm managing a team of systems engineers, and it's just the right fit for me.
Thank you, great answer. Mr. Singh.
So for me, so as I said, I did my undergrad in India, and the college process there is very different from what you guys are experiencing or would be experiencing here. So there are no essays to write, no recommendations to get. There's just an entrance exam, and it is for a group of colleges known as the IITs, Indian Institute of Technologies. And you write that exam. It has math, physics, and a chemistry paper, and a multiple choice on all these 3 subjects. And then you get a rank, all India rank. And depending on that, you get to choose from different campuses and different fields within them. And so when I was in high school, I was so focused on getting selected that I wasn't really thinking much about what am I going to pick once I actually make it through. So eventually I got through, and then as it happened, I had a few options available. I was actually at that time very interested in physics, applied physics, and my mentor throughout my life has been Professor Richard Feynman, who, I don't know if you guys know who he was, but for me, he's like the epitome of like human intellect and genius, but a well-rounded overall personality. But my dad said there'll be no jobs in applied physics, so he said, okay, pick an engineering discipline instead. And the best available at that time was electronics, so I went into that. And when I graduated, I found that India being not very big in electronics at the time, there weren't too many jobs, so I ended up taking a job in software engineering. And software engineering is a pretty broad field, so I pretty soon after that I realized that my real interest within software engineering was in an area of software engineering called networking, which is basically getting packets one place to point A to point B. So all the Zoom communication, I would say that networking engineers have saved the day during COVID, because otherwise none of these meetings would have happened. So I'm pretty proud of that. So it's basically you hear things like IP addresses, TCP stacks, device drivers, stuff like that. So that's what I was interested in. So I started very high level, doing IBM programming, but then quickly shifted to Unix, where I got to work on fairly low level stuff. So my day-to-day job is programming in C, which is a fairly low level language. I'm still a programmer, actually. I've been more than 23 years, but I do like the gratification of actually writing some code that eventually ends up shipping as a product. And I love building products. So I went from an Indian consultancy company called TCS to working for Nokia. Nokia used to be a big company back in the day. They were building all this 3G stuff that was there for a while back. So we worked on that. And then I shifted to the company that I'm working for right now, which is NetApp, which is a data storage company. So even though it's a data storage company, my job is still very much networking centric, where we build a product called Metro Cluster, which is a disaster recovery solution. So what it does is you have two sites, one, let's say in San Francisco, one in Sacramento. You can keep both of them operational. And if something were to happen here, for example, a power outage or an earthquake or a fire or whatever, we can shift your applications or your business logic to the alternate site without impacting any of your applications. So it's basically within, we have some requirements, but it's fairly quick and we don't lose any data. So that's kind of how I've kind of over the years figured out what I really like and kind of gravitated there. It's not that, I had this grand vision from day one that I wanted to be where I am right now. And then, as I said, lately I started realizing that there's a lot of innovation happening on the AI side. I don't know if you guys heard that DeepMind recently solved the grand protein folding challenge, which is very key in figuring out solutions to drug discovery, stuff like that. How amino acids fold into proteins. So all of that stuff is actually very, very interesting. Autonomous driving. I don't know if you guys have seen AlphaGo, which is their program, DeepMind's program that beat the world champion in the game of Go. So then I decided to go back to school to pick up some of those skills. And personally, I felt that whenever I've made progress, it's always been through learning. So I'm my advice would be always sort of be ready to pick up new skills, and that would take your career in many different directions that you would never have imagined from day one.
Great, thank you.
Hey, so Hally, Rudy just joined us, our fourth.
Oh,
panelist.
yes.
Maybe
Hello.
give him the question.
Hi, Mr. Guyon. If it's okay, I'm gonna ask you to introduce yourself, just your name, your job, brief description. real quick. Oh, I think you're muted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, good. Hi, I'm Rudy Guyon. I'm a IP attorney for McAfee, which is a security company, cybersecurity. Um, I'm an attorney, and I've been an attorney for close to 25 years, and mostly I've worked in technology companies in the Bay Area. So do you want me to go through the questions or?
Oh, yes. So
Or
we
just
only got to the
ask me a question?
we only got to the first question so far. So that would be personally for you, what made you choose your career over others?
When I went to college, I started off as an engineer, but I found that I liked reading and writing and analyzing things, doing philosophy, uh, working with books more than I liked working with math. So I moved from technology into that area. And then after I became a lawyer, I decided, well, I found some things that were really interesting about technology. And so I ended up doing a career that combined both of those interests.
All right, thank you. So now we will move on to our second question. For your jobs now or going into your jobs in school maybe, what are some important skills to have in this career? And let's have Mr. Singh start us off.
So I would say the first thing is to, I mean, at least from an engineer's point of view, is the ability to sort of not be daunted by the size of the problem, but have like the skill to sort of break it down. So often business problems, when they come to us as engineers, they are sometimes ill-posed, right? They would come to say, hey, I want X, but then when you sit down and have a conversation about like what do you mean by X, and like what features do you want and what functionality do you want, it turns out that maybe they don't want X, but they want X prime, which is not quite the same thing. And that is a pretty big deal. So maybe you cannot give them X prime right away, but you can give them like a subset of it, which is what we in engineering called a minimum viable product. And they can go and try it out and see how it does, and then prioritize sort of like the next steps. So the first thing I would say is the ability to sort of break down problems in engineering and decide how you want to proceed in that. The second is you need a good sort of balance between things that are tactical and things that are strategic. And a lot of the technology companies, they make products, but they get so wrapped around in sustaining the product that they never think of what to do next. Like what's the next thing that they're going to do? There's a very good book called The Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen, and his um, hypothesis is that the incumbents in technology companies always lose, and they lose because they are so caught up with sustaining the product that they built that they never see what's coming down the line, new technology, new way of doing things. And so as an engineer, you have to keep an open mind and have the ability to say no to some things. Like don't be there to sort of please anybody, right? Just nodding your head and saying yes to everything. Be ready to question things. Be ready to say, hey, we think that instead of doing this small thing that maybe 5 customers are asking for, maybe we want to build this new thing where we see like 1,000 customers would be lining up like 2 years from now. So that's something that it takes a while, like time to, like as a fresh engineer, you may not feel comfortable saying that, but it's something to just keep in the back of your mind. And the last thing I would say is is to find good mentors. So that's very important, is to find people who are willing to sort of give you just the right amount of sort of guidance, but not do it for you, nor sort of throw like the kitchen sink.
Oh, you went on mute, Mr. Singh.
Oops, sorry. Where did I?
The kitchen sink.
Oh, okay. So I was just saying that a good mentor is very important in this field, and if you can find somebody, I would even compromise other aspects to have like a good mentor with you.
I'd like
Alright, great.
I'd like to add on to that one, Hally, because I think Mr. Singh he touched on a lot of things that are very applicable in the career that I'm in as well, with systems engineering and working in a large aerospace company as well. And I'd say some of the key things are what you all are actually learning in school, things like having a growth mindset, and not being afraid of failure, and understanding that there's always improvements. You don't have to get everything right the first time. And and I'd say there's a balance of like the technical skills and the soft skills. And I'd say soft skills are becoming more and more important as well, even in engineering, but especially in systems engineering, because we really have to work with a lot of people and pulling information together. And sometimes it's not always, there's conflicts between things, and you have to, people may feel very strongly about a particular thing that they're recommending, and trying to balance that and work with other people, and being able to listen well to them, and you know uh, there's just a lot of having that willingness to learn, being able to, growth mindset, and being able to work well with others. And then the last thing I would say is also being able to multitask. I'm finding uh, I thought it was kind of a given that most of us knew how to multitask well, where I work, but I'm finding it's not always the case. And while it's okay if you're kind of like hey, I can really only focus on one thing at a time, but I think being able to, at least within the day, you don't necessarily have to do like 5 things in the same hour, but being able to jump from one thing, the first hour, to another thing in the next hour, and be able to kind of say, okay, I'm going to put that thing aside and then move to this thing, is also a very valuable skill to be able to have, and will serve you well too.
Great, thank you. That's it's great that you can relate two different careers to each other. Mr. Guyon, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my career is, more legal than it is technical, but we do some of the same kind of things as a lawyer. We do a lot of, especially software engineers. There's a considerable overlap. I do a lot of analysis and a lot of logic, because a lot of thinking about the law is reading through contracts, or different documents, and thinking through situations and businesses, and coming up through reasons why you should do things. A lot of what we do is we think about, well, what's good for our company, and what are our options, and what's legal, and what should we do and what shouldn't we do. It really helps to have an interest in business if you're going to go into something like technology law. And one of the really fun things of being a technology company is learning about the cutting edge. Some of the minimum things, if you wanted to go into a legal career, and some of the more business kind of parts of a technology company would be being able to read and write, being able to speak or argue your points, And I think an important point was made about soft skills or people skills. I mean, it's important to, when you have to work with a lot of people, it's important to be able to get along with other people and be persistent, uh, be patient with other people. I'm not very good at multitasking myself, but it sure helps to be organized and be able to organize your schedule. So that would be some things. Oh, I also mentioned there's topical things. In a lawyer, we have to learn about the different laws, like IP laws or patent laws or copyright or things like open source. And so there's a lot of legal fields that are very relevant for what people interested in robotics might end up working on. So that's it.
Great, thank you. And finally, let's have Ms. Kawamoto share.
I think everyone touched on like all of the, I mean, I concur with everything everyone else said, particularly the soft skills, but technically for structural engineering, you know, your engineering courses, you know, physics, math, science, all your sciences. But having done a second degree in a similar field, I feel like I had, having that additional knowledge was very helpful. And I think that's the case for any sort of design profession, is if you know what everyone else who's contributing to the design needs to think about, you start to understand what the big picture is. And that's kind of, in architecture, there's, you know, there's the structural engineers, and then there's all these other disciplines, the mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, the architect, you have landscape architect, and all of those disciplines have to sort of coordinate. And that's where the people skills come in. That's where some of the knowledge of their disciplines come in. And it's really nice to have that additional, you know, insight. So something that Mr. Singh mentioned was, you know, keep learning. You never stop learning. You're going to keep, the technology is going to change. You're going to learn about some newfangled profession that you've never heard about. So I guess that just in general, keep learning, you know, be considerate. I think Mr. Guyon mentioned, you know, people skills and being, and Ms. Kahn also mentioned it, but like just thinking about where other people are, even on a day-to-day basis, if they're having a, you know, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed, it could be a really bad day for everybody. So I've been recently put into a management position, and I'm learning this really quickly about how to communicate with people and how to listen better. And I think someone else mentioned that as well. But you know, like all these things they all come together, and they're all very important. And I feel like, you know, if you're practicing it now, like you guys are all doing in robotics, it's awesome. You know, collaborating with people and then listening to what other people's opinions and viewpoints are is very important. And then just my structural engineering firm is small compared to the larger corporations that we're talking about. But one thing I learned in the last several years is you are always marketing, whether it's for yourself or for your firm's product. The people skills are really important. You're selling whatever profession you are doing. Like we're selling our services as a structural engineer. So your people skills are super important.
Great, thank you. Let's go on to our next question, which is, what do you think are the hardest or easiest parts about being in your career? I'm gonna expand it to maybe now in COVID time or before COVID time, or the path to achieve your career. And let's start with Ms. Kahn.
Okay. Well, I'll just address the COVID thing right off the bat because in my field, I'm actually still going into work, but that doesn't mean we get to work the same that we worked before. So, and it's even gotten worse this week because of the additional restrictions. So the first thing that they did was they asked us to stop meeting in person, stop having meetings in conference rooms. But they didn't limit us from, you could still kind of meet with people one-on-one, or you could go, you could go off to a conference room. And now this, and encouraging as many meetings over the phone as possible. And then this week they said, okay, we don't even want you stopping to have a casual conversation at someone's desk. Please limit, all meetings on the phone if possible. No meetings in conference rooms unless you're this, or this, and they prioritize, okay, these meetings can happen only, and everything else virtually. And so luckily it's like all of my team is co-located now. But when I first started my job, this particular job as a manager in July, we weren't all co-located. And so not being able to really, see people on a regular basis was difficult, and having to communicate either through IM or phone calls. It's very bizarre. And now it's like, okay, so people are like, a few feet away from me and I have to call them up on the phone versus, going and talking to them in person. And so it's like other people in the area can hear two other people talking to each other. And it's like, what? So the communication thing is a challenge during COVID time, because there's nothing, when you rate the levels of communication, face-to-face communication is the top. That is, you're gonna have the best exchange of ideas and understanding. You'll get facial expressions, everything with that face-to-face communication. And then below that is probably, phone, and then IM, and then email is probably the last. And I mean, we spend so much time documenting things in email, but being very careful with how we word things, because you don't know how someone else is going to take that. And, again, getting back to the soft skills and making sure that you're not assuming something, a certain thing about somebody else, and not coming off as, abrasive or anything in your emails. So I think communication is definitely, it has definitely been one of the challenges, but it's gotten harder with COVID.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot harder. I'm feeling that at school with all the technical difficulties all the time. Let's have Mr. Guyon go next.
Start with COVID. So basically, in a large company, lawyers are often working on things that are confidential. So we don't often work in big groups. And to that extent, I work with a lot of other people. Like I work with maybe 120 different people a month, which seems like a lot. But I work with a few hours with this person, a few hours with that person. But I'm pretty isolated as an individual worker. So our company sent us all home, and I've been working at home now since last March, and I'll probably be working from my home for at least another 6 or 7 months. So that's kind of a challenge. Sometimes it gets very isolating. We have very good technology, so we use Teams, which is kind of like an equivalent with Zoom, but it also has chat and has email and it has phone calls and it's all built in. We have really good communications. Wi-Fi is excellent nowadays. So we can do everything working from home. It really doesn't affect us that much. But there is definitely a loss by not seeing the other people in the company. That's something that's hard these days. As far as in general, the hardest and easiest parts about being in my career, In the legal area, there can be conflict, and so that's hard. It takes you get better with experience of managing conflict with other people and learning about how to say things to people that they don't really want to hear, like you can't do this, or maybe that's not the best way. Some people don't take that well, especially if they have lots of power in a company, or they just have a very strong mindset, like we need to do that. And so that's a challenge, but it's also rewarding when you do it well. Probably the easiest part of my career is I get to learn a lot of different things. I'm always, to be a lawyer in a company, you have to learn a lot about the business and how the business works, and the technology you work with, and the different laws. And so I find that to pretty easy. It's challenging, but that makes it fun.
Thank you. Great answer. Let's have Ms. Kawamoto go next.
Okay. I guess the COVID situation is very similar to the others. We were fortunate. We do everything electronically. So even the project submittals are electronic. So it was fairly seamless for us, except that we lost our office. So we are all at home, whether we get to go back to an office or not. We don't have one yet, so that's the point. But in terms of career, easiest part, probably, like enjoying the final product. we get to go on photo shoots at the end of a project. Usually takes somewhere between 3 and 5 years for a project to complete. So it's a lot of waiting in between. That's the fun part. And then just meeting different people from the same discipline as well as others in the building industry. Pretty easy. Difficult, probably, dealing with difficult clients. It's again, people skills, I guess, right? There are people who do not understand what it is that we do. So they will try to cut down our costs, our fees. They'll say, well, you only do so much of the building, you should get a smaller percentage. And as structural engineers, we don't get recognized in a building. So as the architect and the landscape architect. So that gets a little bit depressing, but trying to put ourselves out there. But yeah, just not only with difficult clients, sometimes it's difficult other consultants, and sometimes it's difficult people within your office. So I think that would be, in any career. But yeah, in terms of the technical parts, difficulties could be, in a very complex structure, trying to make sure you have all the loads followed through, the path is consistent, and people's lives are at stake. So it is very important that these are thoroughly reviewed and re-reviewed.
All right, got it. Great. And finally, Mr. Singh.
Yes, I think the COVID parts have been touched on already. So I'll jump on to the easiest. So with software engineering, I would say the easiest part is like getting access to all the tools and stuff, especially with open source. You don't need to, in many cases, actually spend anything to be able to like try out a software suite or a product or things like that. So it's very easily accessible. But I think the difficult parts, I would say, as an engineer, are a couple of things. So one is balancing the complexity with the pressure from time to market. So there'll always be a sort of higher up applying pressure saying, hey, we need to get this thing out soon. And that sometimes in us engineers, we have this temptation to cut corners and say, okay, let me like do something quick and dirty and it'll work, and we'll deal with it when something else happens, right? So, but then depending on what you're building, for example, as I said, we do this disaster recovery solution, and sometimes they are this solution is deployed in hospitals in their ICU units, and you don't realize it because you're just writing some piece of code, but it's actually all the medical systems for hospitals are linked together with the solution. And if it goes down and doctors are not able to access patient records, lives are at stake. So um, that's one part. And the other thing is always sort of investing in proper design. That's, I think, initially sort of like designs are these paradigms that they don't teach you in school, and you have to sort of learn with from experience, and it takes some time. So that's why I think I mentioned earlier to have good mentors, because it's always that, you could, maybe take Occam's razor too far and say, okay, this is the simplest thing, let me just go with that. But you want to sort of admire your own handiwork, but as engineers, you have to think about, okay, in what ways can my product fail? And that's a difficult question to ask, because it's hard to be critical of what you're doing, but that's kind of, you have to sort of have this split function personality where you sometimes are in this other person's shoes and asking, how can this break? And then going after those things and making it sort of robust, because the things that we like, if you think of like Apple products and stuff, like things that are really taken off are things that like work really well, and things that don't work well end up actually, the software may be cool and you admire how many lines of code you wrote, but the product's not going to sell. So those are some of the challenging parts, I would say.
All right, thank you. Kind of related question. I know a lot of you are very passionate about your jobs, and that's great. So I was kind of wondering, what do you find any part of your job very fulfilling or enjoyable? Let's have Mr. Guyon answer first.
Yeah, I'll say I'll mention two things, and one is on what I'm doing right now, and what I've done over my career would be the other one. So, as a business lawyer, law has lots of different fields. Like, for example, privacy or corporate law or intellectual property or privacy. I said privacy, um, contracts, uh, working, building products, doing advertising. And I've gotten a chance to do all of those things in my career, and they're quite different. And they require different bodies of knowledge, but a lot of overlap in the skills. And that's fun about being a lawyer, because it does require that. But I think one of the things that I've really liked, which is most relevant maybe for this group, is right now I'm something that's called a product lawyer. And so I work with teams of engineers and something called a product manager, plus what's also known as extended teams in my industry, which are the different accountants and marketing people and operations people and support people. And all of these people work together in different specialties to put together software and cloud and appliances, different kind of technologies. And in our industry, our challenge is always to work together to build a new products on the cutting edge, get it out, find a way to sell it, find differentiators. And it's fun to work as a team and actually build something. And I'm not the one who's actually building the product, but I'm definitely part of the team. And that's quite rewarding.
Great, thank you. Let's have Mr. Singh go next.
I would say for me, the most fulfilling part is really seeing your product in action. Actually, like as a software engineer, you write some lines of code and it compiles and runs, and that's all great. But when it actually is running as a product end to end, and you can see users benefiting from it, that's the most rewarding part. And I'll give two examples. So most of the Disney movies that you guys see and enjoy are rendered on our storage. So all that graphics, those people who are designing the graphics, all that storage is backed up on NetApp. And it's a pretty demanding environment because rendering, it requires like a pretty heavy bandwidth. And the second more recent example is that the uh, vaccine that is coming out right now from Pfizer, that was also developed on NetApp storage. So even though you may see Pfizer as the face of the vaccine, there's a whole suite of technology companies behind Pfizer that have really accelerated the development of this vaccine. So I know you guys know, but a vaccine typically it takes 3 to 5 years from beginning to end to go through all the regulatory process. So some of it is really the regulations that have been cut down, but a lot of it has to do with technology that has stepped up to accelerate the development of this vaccine. And it just gives me some comfort to know that like our product that I've worked on personally has been a part of that. So that's very rewarding.
Got it. Great. Let's have Ms. Kawamoto go next.
Okay. I guess I mentioned one earlier is, going to the photo shoot of the final building is always fun. But I think for structural engineers, particularly, we get peppered with questions throughout the process of construction by contractors and owners. And so sort of justifying the design as you go along is a little frustrating, but at the end, when a product is up, standing, even if it's still in its skeletal form, and someone says, wow, that looks awesome. That's quite nice. And when people do decide to express the structure, it's always quite fulfilling too, because they're not afraid to show what's actually holding everything together. Because typically it's covered in some finish. And then also someone mentioned team, and I do agree. Even our internal team, we have 2 or 3, maybe 4 people working on a project, and maybe it's got crazy deadline, and everyone's working together to get it together. And when it's done, it's like, yes, score. So, yes.
Yes, that does seem like a very satisfying feeling, seeing your building. It's like when we CAD a bot and then we finally see it in person. And finally, Ms. Kahn.
Yeah, I mean, I ditto to what everyone else is saying. When you see your finished product come together and know that you had a hand in that, I'll go into a little bit more about the kinds of engineers that I manage right now, and a role that I used to have. These engineers are called responsible systems engineers, system integrators, and they're each responsible for an individual product, but each of these products eventually get integrated as well together and produce a final product. And I think what's most rewarding for me, I mean, in addition to because sometimes it takes a long time for us to build our product, but having like those micro successes, I would say, along the way, when things come together, you have a successful design review, those kinds of things, and you see teams working really well together. But then the other thing is with our customer. And so we have a pretty strong relationship with our customer. We have a lot of government contracts, and so getting to hear from our customer directly about how our products serves the national war fighters, the military, and saving lives, those kinds of things, that's really rewarding to me, to know the the value, the importance of what we're bringing. So yeah, all of that to what everyone else said. Whenever you able to see the finished product, see the results of that, I guess I'll say, I mean, one of the other things, just to plug something that I can specifically talk about for Lockheed is we've done a lot of the Mars missions. And so being able to see one of those Mars rovers or Mars instruments make it to Mars and getting to see the pictures come back from that, or hear about the results of what they learned from that, that's always really exciting. And, so being at a company that that builds a lot of these products, getting to hear about those firsthand results is really rewarding and enjoyable for me.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is our last question before we open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions right now, feel free to put them in the chat. You can privately message me or send it to everyone. That's fine, we'll get to them both. Okay, so here's the last question. Looking back on your career past, is there something that you wish you had learned when starting your career, or wish to have experienced before starting your career? And let's start with Ms. Kawamoto.
Okay, I guess all the things that we've been talking about, I kind of learned along the way. Wish I had known, about working as a team is super important. I mean, I saw it in my parents as they interacted with their peers, but didn't really think it was like a business thing. I mean, it was just something that is higher in importance than I thought going into my profession. The other thing is business skills. Like I'm in a small firm, so maybe it's not relevant to larger companies, but I put on several hats every day. Do the marketing, do the invoicing, do how the business runs. Would have been really, really helpful to understand going into this field. So that's what
Great, thank you. Ms. Kahn, would you like to go next?
Yeah, to build on what Ms. Kawamoto said as well, I had to learn a lot of soft skills. They didn't all come naturally to me. And I would also say to Mr. Singh's point earlier about finding good mentors. I didn't know the first thing about, oh, I should find a mentor. Like I got put into a mentoring program maybe 3-4 years into my career, and I did, we're like, okay, here's the choice of mentors, go pick one. And I'm like, I don't know how to go pick somebody. And it turned out the person that, a lot of people went and did their research and had conversations with these people, and they were all taken. And so I got whoever was left over, and he really wasn't a good mentor for me. And so I think I had a lot of fits and starts in terms of my direction and where I went, and just had to learn a lot of those things along the way. Also, I think the importance of building relationships and networking. When I first got to work, I thought, okay, you come in, you do your job, you go home, you only talk to people for what you need to get out of them. But I've since learned that no, it's actually important that you get to know the person a little bit better, because by doing that, you've made a personal connection. And when you ask for something from them later, they'll be more inclined to help you out. So there's a lot of that relationship building. And so certainly over the last several years, I've become very involved with our women's network as well. And so learned a lot from a lot of other women, and gotten very involved with those events, and learning professional development together, and everything. So I would have loved to have had all of that, my first 5 years or so, and I didn't have that. So that's kind of the only thing looking back. But I think, the business has evolved. A lot of those things just weren't known as well then. We didn't have all of that. We've kind of learned as we go along. But so definitely the younger engineers who are starting out now are learning all of that now, and getting a much better first start.
Thank you. Great answer. And let's have Mr. Guyon go next.
So I guess at the start of the career, I'd say two things. One, I was pretty good at. I think it's important at the beginning of your career is to try and get exposure to a lot of things in your area. Maybe even look outside your area. So the breadth of what you learn, be open to learning new things. Why? Well, you might find out that you're good at something that you didn't think you were good at, or you might find out you're interested in something you didn't already know about. And that certainly happened to me. And I know a lot of people who they don't end up where they started out. And so it's important at the beginning to, get some breadth and not just overly narrow focus. And then the other thing was something I learned when I was working at Intel, and I wish I had learned this earlier in my career. It's important to think about where you want to go. So, like, what do you want to be doing in 5 years? Do you want to manage people? Do you want to learn a new field? Do you want to live in a different country? What do you, and then start thinking about, what do you need to get there? Oh, do I need to take a new math class? Do I need to get a certification? Do I need to study language? And if you think about that, you can talk to people along the way and find out, well, how did they get there? And somebody mentioned mentors. And if you just think about it a little bit logically, you may be able to help yourself achieve your career goals, 5 years down the line. And I think that's an important lesson.
Yep, I certainly agree. Thank you. And Mr. Singh?
So, like as engineers, when we start our careers, we start with a specific, let's say, certain area, and over time get better and better at it. And one of the things that I wish I realized earlier is to exercise the power of leverage. So you get senior in rank, there are junior people who come underneath you, and when you are given as a team a difficult problem, there is this very strong urge to say, hey, I don't want to sit down and like mentor these guys, and it'll going to take them too long. Let me just do it myself. And it happens to a lot of people. And while you can do it once or twice, it doesn't help you scale. And in the end, you realize that you're digging a very deep hole for yourself. It's hard to kind of get out of. So understanding the power of leverage, I wish I had done this a lot sooner. I had this very strong desire to sort of just like take on problems and tackle the hard bits myself. But what would happen is that the rest of the team would lack in expertise. Some of them even there was attrition, they left, and I couldn't figure out, because I was definitely not a people's person, I was more of an engineer, so understand what was going on. But then you can always say, okay, let me give this problem to some of the junior people, help them with some of the ideas, but let them take on this problem. And eventually you realize that you will then develop a strong sort of second tier of engineers who are able to sort of scale your operations much beyond what you can do yourself, right? So I'm sure you guys experience that as you have sort of freshmen and junior people coming in. Sometimes you say, okay, if I give it to this person, they might make a mess. Let me just do it myself. But that's not a scalable solution. It doesn't work long term. So that's something that I am myself guilty of, and I've realized it far too late in my career. But now I always ask for some additional time and give the problem to people who are sort of up and coming, to help them develop their skills, ask them to sort of further delegate smaller bits to people further down the line. And that way the whole organization develops into a much stronger entity than just me as an engineer.
Great, thank you. So I think it's about time we open it up to the audience for chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in now. I got some questions during the panel. Here's one from Ms. Kahn. You mentioned that you got a degree while working You got a degree while working at Lockheed Martin. How was that experience, and was it tough to juggle both?
Yeah, so it actually worked out fairly well. It was a joint opportunity with between Lockheed and Stanford. And so the classes that we had were the timing of the classes were either, in the afternoon, something that wasn't during like the main business hours. And we worked with a group of people, we were split into teams. This was for we're split into teams that were all from Lockheed. And so, gosh, it's so long ago. The main thing that I remember that I wasn't expecting was that, I mean, because this was 17ish or so years ago, and I was pregnant with Ben at the time. And I wasn't expecting to be pregnant when I was going through that program. So that was probably the bigger challenge than necessarily juggling work. Certainly, the first few months. But yeah, I mean, I was still able to keep up with it, but then I actually had some maternity leave, so then I wasn't working necessarily, and still able to work with the team remotely and still finish up what I needed to for the course, because it was, I mean, the main coursework was like in the first 3 months, and then the rest of it was hands-on, and it was developing a project. We came up with a CubeSat that we designed and actually built and then operated at the very end of the year. So not putting up in space operated, but we actually we did some ground testing of it at the end of the year. So yeah, it worked out really well because because of the partnership that they had built with Lockheed and Stanford for that particular program.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Do you have any advice from your field that can be applied to robotics? I know we kind of touched a lot on these, and I'm going to make this kind of an open-ended question, so anyone who wants to add anything can go ahead.
Can I add one thing? And this is funny coming from the legal field. Open source software is really important these days. And that's changed a lot since I started practicing law. 20 years ago, most engineers and engineers probably liked it, but most companies in Silicon Valley didn't want to use open source. But now open source is really popular, really growing, and everybody uses it in all these areas. And the engineers I work with are looking through open source projects all the time to find something that they can pull in and use. And there's crowdsourcing that goes on with open source, right? Where everybody's contributing to the software. And that just seems to be like a very important development. And so being able to pull in, find out what's out there in the open source area and bring it in to robotics projects seems to me something that's going to be very useful.
I'll second what Mr. Guyon said. There's a saying that you may not be in software, but software is going to be in your field. So wherever you are, software is eventually going to play some part. And especially with robotics, I'd like to drop in a thing that you guys can look up, something called reinforcement learning. It's a form of machine learning, artificial intelligence. Berkeley happens to be a pretty big center for it. And there's some cutting edge work being done, but especially it's basically how do we make robots sort of learn from their environments in a sort of dynamic way where you don't have to pre-program them and they just learn as they go. So using those things can put you sort of over other people who are just building sort of simpler things to go for the easier points, maybe taking on some of the more difficult challenging problems. And then, like, I think it was said before, is just be willing to take the risk. Like at the end of the day, I personally believe that it's not the um, end thing, but it's the journey that counts. So even if you, let's say, doesn't work, you would have learned a lot that is going to be worth the time that you spent on it.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kawamoto, Ms. Kahn, do you want to add anything onto that?
I mean, I guess I'll just say, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The kind of work that we're building at Lockheed Martin, robotics is very applicable. That's why I think Lockheed is a huge supporter of FIRST and the whole process that you all go through of getting a set of requirements and then coming up with an idea and then coming up with a design. All of that is the same process that we apply for the products that we build as well. We starts off with a customer gives us a set of requirements, and usually it's a very you know, maybe not even as detailed as what you get from FIRST as far as a set of requirements. It could be even smaller than that, and we have to spend a lot of time churning on those requirements with our customer to come up with, you know, a design of a product that's going to meet their needs the best. So absolutely, what you do in FIRST Robotics is directly applicable to the work that we do at Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, I guess my contribution to this is not so much technical, although, you know, physics, but kind of related to the mentor minute that I had about teamwork. Everybody that's part of the team contributes in some fashion, and consider yourself as part of the gear, right? The whole system. You don't just work in a bubble. Everything that you do affects whoever else is on your team. So just like, it's just general, any team needs this sort of consideration. You can't just say, well, I did my work, I'm done. It's always going to be like, you know, okay, well, where are the other holes? Let's see where I can help out here. You're not just, maybe you've been given a task, but if you think about the whole picture, you can always contribute some more.
Great, thank you. We have, I skipped over a question. Did you have leadership experience when you first entered the workplace, and did it help you? Again, this is probably an open question to anyone.
No, I didn't. I had to learn it on the job.
I think my only experience leadership-wise is on sports teams. Captain, sports team captain, that's about it, you know, rally the troops, you know, everybody's shooting for the same goal kind of thing. It would have been good to have training, you know, like the soft skills that we keep talking about. It's super important in getting everyone to be able to work together. You know, don't gossip, you know, you know, it just creates friction in a group. And so I would definitely, if there is a leadership class that you could take, I would suggest taking it.
And then for me, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead. I'll wait.
Thank you. So I think for me, I don't think I had anything in like a technical role, but the closest was when I was still in college. We were living in a dorm and there was a mess, and we had a cook there, it's the whole team, and we had to sort of, it was like a contract. So I was like the manager for that, managing the mess. And it's a difficult proposition collecting money from people who want to eat but not pay. You have to like be on good terms with everybody. And like India is a place where people come from many different sort of cultural backgrounds. So getting even simple things, consensus like what are the menu items when people, some are strict vegetarians, some cannot live without non-veg, and all those kind of things. So it was a good experience. And then one additional thing I did was, in India, we had this thing where in the third year of college, we took a tour of some of the leading sort of facilities in the country that were related to our field in electronics. So it was called a tour, and I was the tour manager. So back in the day, there was no internet, so you had to call and make train reservations for 40 people to go over like a top. We were like in the, I would say, like the northeastern part of India, and going all the way to the south and to the west, and then circling around the country. So it was a good learning experience how to sort of manage all of that by sort of talking to people you've never talked to before, and that I think was a little bit helpful when I started my job.
So I had a little bit of leadership experience, but one thing I learned about leadership at working in Silicon Valley, was that the different people that you meet or that may work for you are not going to do things exactly the same way you do. And it's good if you can figure out what they like to do and how they do it and how they can contribute, and find a way to bring them into the team and use what they're good at and use their strengths, and not expect them to be exactly like you. And if you can develop that kind of mindset, you'll be able to manage people pretty well.
All right, thank you so much. We did not get any other questions. I don't know if people are typing them out or thinking through some that they want to ask. Or not. So I think that about does it for our first panel. Thank you, parents, for volunteering and sharing about your careers. It was super helpful for us students. Thank you, students, too, for coming and asking questions. We'll be having another panel soon with brand new cast. And yeah, thanks all for coming.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you, Hally, for
Thank you.
moderating us.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, thanks for talking.
Yeah, good job, everyone.